In the 1920s, young women were told to lick their paintbrushes, just a quick touch to the lips to bring the bristles to a fine point so they could paint tiny numbers onto watch dials with perfect precision. What was on those brushes was radium. Their employer knew exactly what it was and told them it was harmless. This is the story of the Radium Girls, and it changed American labor law forever. In the early 20th century, radium was marketed as a miracle substance. It glowed faintly in the dark due to its radioactivity, and companies were fascinated by that glow. The U.S. Radium Corporation, based in Orange, New Jersey, used radium mixed with paint to create luminous dials for watches and instruments, glow-in-the-dark numbers that soldiers could read at night without a flashlight, a huge advantage during World War I. The company hired young women, many still in their teens, to hand-paint these tiny numerals, work that required extreme precision and paid well above typical factory wages for the era. To keep the tips of their paintbrushes fine enough for detailed work, the women were taught a technique called lip dip paint. Put the brush tip between your lips to shape the bristles into a point, dip it in the radium paint, then paint the number. Then repeat that motion hundreds of times a day, thousands of times a week for years. The company's own scientists and chemists working in separate protected areas of the factory wore lead aprons and handled radium with tongs and masks. The women on the factory floor were given no such protection. Many were even encouraged to paint their nails, teeth, and faces with the leftover radium paint for fun after their shifts, since it glowed prettily in the dark. Some called themselves the Ghost Girls because they'd walk home from the factory glowing faintly in the evening light. Within a few years, the women began getting sick, jaw pain that wouldn't go away, teeth falling out for no clear reason, anemia, fatigue, and in many cases, their jawbones literally crumbling and disintegrating inside their mouths, a condition doctors began calling radium jaw. Radium, chemically similar to calcium, was being absorbed directly into their bones, where it continued emitting radiation for years, essentially irradiating them from the inside for as long as they lived. When workers started dying and sought help, the company's response wasn't to investigate the paint. It was to deny any connection. U.S. Radium hired its own doctors, who publicly claimed the women's illnesses were caused by other factors entirely. Syphilis was one explanation offered to explain away the symptoms in the press, an accusation designed specifically to shame the women into silence. Internal company documents, only made public decades later through lawsuits, showed executives were aware of the dangers of radium exposure far earlier than they ever admitted publicly. In 1925, a small group of the affected women, later nicknamed the Radium Girls by the press, decided to fight back. Grace Fryer, one of the most prominent among them, spent 2 years trying to find a lawyer willing to take on a powerful corporation, something almost unheard of for factory workers, let alone women, in that era. She eventually found representation, and in 1927, she and 4 other former dial painters filed a lawsuit against U.S. Radium Corporation. The case became a national media sensation. The women, several of whom could barely walk into the courtroom without assistance by that point, testified about their symptoms in devastating detail. In 1928, facing overwhelming public pressure and mounting evidence, U.S. Radium settled out of court, providing the women compensation and covering their medical expenses, though for several of the women, including Grace Fryer, it came too late to save their lives. The case did something bigger than compensate a handful of workers. It established a legal precedent that employees have the right to sue employers for damages caused by unsafe labor practices, and it directly influenced the creation of new industrial safety standards and radiation exposure limits still used today. The Radium Girls case is often cited as a foundational moment in the development of occupational disease law in the United States, and later informed federal workplace safety standards enforced by OSHA decades afterward. The women who painted those dials never knew they were painting themselves into American legal history. They just wanted the pain to stop and to be believed.